quarantine, no one can hear you podcast. And around here, we like to keep it 100. It's the Pod People celebrating 100 big Buca Deep episodes. I'm Matisse Van Rossum, and I'm the last surviving member of this podcast. Signing on.
I'm George Alien, and I'm here to do some podcasting. Ben, for short.
I'm Cleveland Mosier, and make sure to call your mother.
Oh, is it because the computer's named Mother?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Took me a second.
it's a deep cut.
Well, we did it. We got all the way to 100 episodes. And some of you might be thinking, but Matisse, what about those mini pods that became the format for the regular show? What about those? Didn't you really hit 100 episodes about 25 episodes ago? And to you, I say, listen here, buckaroo. Do you think I'm going to go in and renumber all of these things? Absolutely not. So this is our 100th episode.
Yeah, shut up, nerds.
Shut up, nerds. Yeah. You think you can count things? Do you think this is a podcast where we count numbers?
It's not a math cast.
No, this is a horror movie podcast, not a cast for fucking calculus.
Horror movies notoriously don't care about numbers.
That's right. For our 100th episode, we decided to do something very special. We decided to watch Alien, the 1979 classic by Ridley Scott, written by Dan O'Bannon, and starring a whole bunch of very good actors, such as Sigourney Weaver, Tom Skerritt, John Hurt, Veronica Cartwright, Harry Dean Stanton, Ian Holm, Yaphet Kotto, and Balaji Badejo.
And a great cat.
And a great cat. One of the finest cats in cinema history. My personal favorite cinema cat.
Also, art by H.R. Geiger and Mobius.
Mobius.
Drinking
Mobius. Morbius drinking a 40 in a death basket.
Good old Eric Andre deep cut there.
Well, this episode is off to a great start. Can you tell we've been doing this at least 100 times?
Yeah. Clearly, we are experienced professionals who know exactly what we're doing and aren't afraid to go, or are afraid to go off the rails, because I was being sarcastic.
Yes. Well, this is maybe the complete opposite end of the spectrum from last week's pick, The Evil Within.
Yeah,
Two
wow.
very different sorts of masterpieces.
Yes. Alien is probably my favorite movie of all time, if you put a gun to my head and made me pick just one. So I've been wanting to cover this one on the show for a really, really long time. Last year was its 40th anniversary. This movie came out 41 years ago. Hard to believe, because I think it holds up incredibly well.
It's funny you mentioned this is your favorite of all time, because I'd probably say that Blade Runner is mine. So,
wow, both Ridley
Scott
Scott's.
films, yeah.
Ah, that's funny. My favorite film is Gladiator.
Yeah, Gladiator. Right.
I
I was
think
trying to think
Gladiator's
of
a
a
great
really
pick.
bad Ridley Scott movie.
Yeah, but
I
Gladiator's
couldn't think
fun.
of one.
Yeah.
off the
Yeah,
top of
Robin
my
Hood
head.
would be my go-to bad one. Like that Robin Hood movie was not enjoyable.
Yeah, Ridley Scott has made some movies.
He has.
I would argue that this is his magnum opus. I guess you would argue differently, Cleveland, for Blade Runner. Blade Runner is great, too.
You could likely say the same about like Gladiator or like Black Hawk Down. Like each one is like encompasses such a wildly different genre for the most part. I mean, there's crossover with Alien and Blade Runner, of course, but his other films and works are, are all over the damn place.
It's true, yeah. He has not been tied down to any specific genre over his career.
At all.
The funny thing about Blade Runner, to just go on a minor sidetrack here, is
Sure, I mean,
it
we
really
don't get to
depends
talk about
on
Blade Runner
which
very
of the 15 cuts of Blade Runner we're talking about, whether it's a
True.
masterpiece or not.
This is very true. Whichever cut, I think it was the theater cut that has narration in it. Not that one.
Yeah, definitely not,
Not that one. The ambiguous one where there's no narration is easily
I
the
think
better
the
pick.
answer is the most recent cut. like director's cut or
There-
whatever
yeah,
that
there's
came out in
so many.
2007.
Seventh director's cut.
Yeah, the seventh director's
Well,
cut.
unlike Blade Runner, Alien is a very singular vision in that, like, we did see the director's cut, but
I couldn't tell the difference.
I couldn't tell the difference, and honestly, between the two, I think the director's cut is actually just a minute shorter.
I was looking for it the whole time and I couldn't figure out what they cut. Like, it's been a while since I've seen Alien last, but I've seen it so many times. Like, it felt like it had everything in it. I don't know. Like, the production of Alien is one of the most fascinating parts of it to me because it was really born out of the failure of Dune, Alejandro Jodorowsky's Dune, and all of the people that he was bringing together, like H.R. Giger and Dan O'Bannon and Mobius were all, like, working together. And when the production of Dune fell apart and they realized that it would never get made, they said, hey, let's collaborate on something else. And that something else was Alien.
I'm glad that we got something out of that.
Oh my
Dune is
God,
one of
yeah.
the greatest stories of like a fizzled project where so many huge names and people were working on it and it just kind of fizzled out. But we ended up getting this, and you know, it really, at its core, it starts with Dan O'Bannon's excellent script, in my opinion.
Yes, I agree.
It's near perfect in its structure and execution, obviously, but you know, you take a great script and really elevate it to something beyond.
It's a very lean script, but also very slow. It's not fast-paced by any means, but I wouldn't cut anything. Every scene feels relevant.
Funny you mention that you wouldn't cut anything because that's actually almost entirely what Scott did with the director's cut. I just looked it up, and it is indeed a minute shorter than the original version. A lot of the intro shots are actually shortened to get to the action faster, which I kind of disagree with. I wouldn't want to do that. Also,
I mean,
the other cool thing,
I didn't think it was noticeable. Honestly, the director's cut is very close to the theatrical cut. So, I mean, I think that just goes to show that they got it fucking right the first time.
And it's so funny because usually you see director's cuts that are X amount minutes longer, you know, where this one, it's already an excellent film. So if anything, he just tightened up some elements, which it's not a knock on the original by any means, because the original is great.
Well, I mean, this era of horror films, too, is like, especially like studio horror films, was really the golden age as far as I'm concerned. Like, Invasion of the Body Snatchers came out a year before this. Texas Chainsaw Massacre came out like 4 or 5 years before this.
they're willing to give like new directors budget.
And
Howdy didn't show because like Scott had done very little like
and
before
like
this film.
and carte blanche to like do what they wanted to do with like very little studio interference and letting them go crazier, darker, gorier directions. Like for the time, like this movie was unprecedented in the stuff that it was doing. Like it changed the culture of horror forever as far as I'm concerned.
Oh yeah.
It's very much a creature feature.
Absolutely.
You know, in the same vein as something like a Jaws. But what I find really interesting is where Jaws reveals the shark at the very end, basically. This movie shows us the alien within the first hour, first half of the movie.
It shows us parts of it that it wants us to see. I think that the treatment of how they show the alien in this movie is one of its strong suits. Because, I mean, maybe the worst looking effect in the movie is like at the very end when the action figure on a string gets like blown out into space.
Yeah.
And I think that like they did what they needed to do to like hide the rubberiness of the alien suit. You can see
almost
it a
never
little
see
bit,
the whole
but-
alien at any given time. You never see its whole body standing there. You do all of the time in the second one, but
Yeah.
in the first one, there's rarely a shot. You get it emerging from the coils, like at the end, like when it's been hibernating. You get it like when it's on the chains, like unwrapping and coming down. But even then, like the lower half of its body is often out of the shot, or in the tunnels, like it's still in the shadows there. You only get like its hands and head really coming out.
Yeah,
And
whenever they show it, the lighting is extremely dark, and a lot of what you're seeing is silhouette and form and like texture. I think that the texture of the creature is very important to giving you more ideas about what it is, because it's so fucking slimy. Honestly, for cinematography purposes, that works great, because like if something's wet and slimy, then like the light reflects off of it in really nice ways, and when you have really dynamic, dark, like kind of noir lighting, it just makes it
it's so tactile.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, just in general, that's everything in this movie. Like the production design is fucking insane.
Top tier.
The
ultimate, the prime standard.
The number of models and miniatures and
full scale
sets and props and stuff that they built is.
Let's talk about how many old planes they took apart to make those sets. Every component and panel on the wall was like meticulously built by the crew. They scavenged all manner of World War II to present day, like jet engines and turbines and stuff, and like took them apart and like reassembled them into other objects, like to match on the ship. And it's just so cool. It's to scale kit bashing, essentially, like what you get, where like they took like battleship parts for like models to make the Death Star and or the ship in this film, the Nostromo.
Which they did plenty of in this as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of kit bashing for the Nostromo as well. God, I love it. It might be like one of my all-time favorite film aesthetics. Kit bash, like actual set ships, when they look that good, they're just unbeatable. And it is just such a fine line, I think, when it comes to practical effects for either like people in suits or spaceships. It is such a fine line between it's a spray bottle, like the Dalek is just a trash can, or it is real. It is actually something you can reach out and grab. And it's such a tightrope walk with practicals in a way that like CG isn't necessarily the same.
Well, let's talk a little bit about what the aesthetic of this movie did for, I think, science fiction as a genre. Because if you look at sci-fi up till this point, or at least this era, it's all very clean, futuristic, pristine, like smooth, reflective chrome, sterile, white spaces. It's the future. Then in this movie, it's like these people are like towing like mined material back to Earth. It's a commercial freighter, like it's grungy.
Yeah, and
space capitalism.
One of the reasons I think it's so timeless is because you have all this dated technology, not because it's set in the past, but because that technology is reliable and easy to do maintenance on.
And cheap, because the company's cutting costs, and that's made quite clear. Like they're using like 80s computers and stuff, not because this film was shot in the 80s, but because they want to cut every dime possible to make that ship run.
Right. And I mean, it's a like I said, it's a commercial freighter. It's not meant to look good and be shiny and use the most expensive technology. What they need is rugged and reliable and cheap. So like the computers do look old and outdated, and everything is kind of dirty and oil stained and grimy, and like you saw some of that stuff like in Star Wars a couple of years before this. But even so, Star Wars is more fantasy than sci-fi, and it even of course bills itself as being a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, so it's not, I don't really consider Star Wars science fiction, but this is like, that was not really the aesthetic of science fiction before this. And just look at how many fucking movies and video games and everything have taken that sort of like grimy sci-fi aesthetic.
Yeah, I feel like in recent times we've kind of gone back towards the
more pristine,
sleek, clean stuff, only getting flashes of the grimier side of stuff with stuff like Underwater, for example.
Yeah, we talked about that on Underwater. Their production design was heavily inspired by this movie.
Yeah, I think the closest comparison this film has to anything predating it would be just as media. I can't even like, I don't. It's hard to grasp at film even, but first pick would be H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds, because War of the Worlds is also very like grimy and dark. A great portion of it takes place in a basement.
Yeah.
As our protagonist is trying to evade the aliens.
Right, but it's taking place during an alien invasion of Earth. It's like in the present for when it's written, whereas with something like this, it's in the future.
Oh yeah, but like just that sense of like grime and like this biological fear.
Yeah.
This Lovecraftian sort of quality of the unknown. The horror of Alien is only partially technological. The majority of the horror extends from biology. Like, this is a biological horror film.
Yeah.
So much of science fiction is focused on the technological. So very often it is the Verne, like, submarines and spaceships and rockets and
Well,
those
technology
elements.
has a lot of horrifying implications.
Right.
But this is like it uses a more technological or futuristic setting as its backdrop. But yeah, the horror does not come from the science.
Right, and in that case, this film, I wouldn't want to compare it too closely to Star Wars in that same regard, because this film is still, I think, well qualified as science fiction and not sci-fi fantasy, even though it is a horror film. Like, biology is really, I think, the big word of the day, and that's what keeps this film scientific. There's still plenty of scientific dialogue,
Totally.
Especially with
Ash.
Discussing the
Bilbo
nature of the creature.
Baggins, Ian Holm.
That's right, Monk.
No, that's Tony Shalhoub.
You gotta give me, they look similar.
I mean, kind of.
They look kind of similar. Guess I never really heard any like detective Bilbo jokes, so that would be why.
Yeah,
not the same
because
person.
they're not the same person. Ian Holm and Tony Shalhoub are not the same, and I'm pretty sure Ian Holm is like at least 20
Much older,
at
yes.
least 20 to 30 years older than Tony Shalhoub.
That checks out. Yeah, the chronology wasn't working there for me, so that makes good sense.
Well, like we've been talking about science fiction versus science fantasy, but really this is a message movie, a very prescient one, all about the dangers of breaking social isolation.
Of breaking quarantine.
Yeah.
Yeah, very specifically quarantine.
Yeah, man, like Ripley is really the voice of reason for so much of this movie. I mean, I guess that's why she's the main character, huh? but like, yeah, when they come back with John Hurt and the alien on his face, she's like, "No, I'm not letting you back in. It's literally against the law. It's breaking quarantine. You got to leave him out there." And like, no matter how much Captain Dallas like rages at her, she doesn't. And then, of course, Ash lets them in because Ash has ulterior motives. I know I kind of ragged on you at the beginning, Cleveland, because you said that there was foreshadowing that Ash was an android because he
I'm right, and you know it.
Because he did math fast in his head. I don't think you're right, but I do think that your point stands, that like the way that they subtly foreshadow Ash's turn or his ulterior motives is handled really well when you know how to look for it. Just like there's so many times.
Yeah, on second viewing, it's
there's
delight,
so
or
many
fifth viewing.
I mean, yeah, bazillionth viewing, but there's so many times where it'll just be like a reaction shot that you wouldn't think anything of if you weren't looking for it. Just like at specific moments, like they cut to Ash, and it's just like the look is like there's something else going on in his head, and I love the way that is handled, and just like his reveal as the android is handled so spectacularly.
Oh yes, and as I said during the film, Ridley Scott really has a thing for like twitching, barfing robots.
Yeah.
He loves that aesthetic. I don't know what it is about it, but I love it too. So it's quite nice.
One of the things I really appreciate about Ash too is he's more expressive than you would normally see androids and robots.
Right.
You compare the Ash's portrayal to like David's and Prometheus,
or
for example.
even Bishop's in Aliens.
It's just night and day, like there's a sense of surprise to it because you don't expect it.
I mean, it's a remarkable surprise if you don't know what's coming going into it, because there's absolutely nothing to suggest anything like that throughout the rest of the movie. Like, it's such a shocking like weird moment. And like that's another thing that like the science fiction aspect of it does really well, is that in the future you have carte blanche to use androids and artificial life forms and stuff like that, but that doesn't mean that it can't be a surprise when the audience isn't looking for it, you know? And just the way that that's handled in the scene when Ripley, you know, goes in and talks to Mother and sees that the priority of the mission all along was to get the organism on board and take it back to the company. And, you know, Ash kind of tries to kill her. And like just the way that starts, that close-up shot of his face and like that little droplet of white like trickles down his forehead and it looks like he's sweating milk. Like if you don't know what's coming from that, like that is just so unsettling and weird.
It's just perfectly wrong. Like the wrongness of like him like spewing like the milk, you know, like that weird substance is like that's your first legitimate indicator that he's not human, that something is off with him.
Right.
And
you would
up till now you've only been under the impression that alien is like that biological alien is what is going on.
Well, and that's what you might think too before, you know, he gets his head knocked off and you see that he's an android, is like you see him spewing this white milk and like, okay, the alien got to him. It has some other powers that we didn't know of.
Which is the game of the whole movie, is what can Alien do?
What can it do? Because it changes forms so many times that it's so unknown and alien. The alien is alien.
Right, and like so many escape films and other horror films or even action adventure films, you know, of the time and up till present tend to focus on like escape the environment, you know, escape the evil castle, escape the cube, escape whatever it is. And it's about understanding how to get out of the environment. But here it's understanding like what is hunting you down.
And how to get it out of the environment, because there's nowhere for you to go because you're in the middle of space.
And it's cool because our protagonists are quite comfortable and at home on this strange spaceship, but the audience isn't. The viewer is not. So we have this doubled sense of discomfort and sort of floating atmosphere because we're kind of stuck in this place that we don't understand, and we're being hunted by something we don't understand. But fortunately, at least the characters feel comfortable there. You know, it is their home.
It's their norm.
Going back to Ash, also his nature is alien as well. It still carries on the core themes of the film.
Yeah.
He is a non-biological alien. He's a synthetic based life form.
Yeah.
Instead, still non-human, and it plays at those same themes that were largely popularized by Hollywood and cinema well before then. There are plenty of tropey examples of like serial sci-fi before now that pulled from the secret android sort of thing, because it's they're secretly a communist. It's that same principle. It's
Invasion of the Body Snatchers.
Exactly, written all over Invasion. And it's so gratifying to see that done realistically and terrifyingly and horrifyingly, legitimately so, and not in a 50s serial sense. It's just so gratifying.
You bring up a good point that I think the title Alien does not refer to the word as a noun, it's as an adjective. It's more than just the alien creature. It is about what makes something alien. And that applies to, like you said, not only the xenomorph, but also Ash. Ben, you were going to say something.
Yeah, well, another point you made that I really want to unpack a little bit is you were talking about the difference in familiarity between the characters and the audience. And I actually disagree a little bit, only in that I think Ridley Scott does, and the production design team as a whole, does such an excellent job of kind of making a sort of spatial map of the ship so well, in how they go from scene to scene and from sequence to sequence, that you can really map out the ship in your head, and it feels like a very physical location.
It's not like the Overlook.
It's very reminiscent to World War II and post-war submarine films in that respect. Like the tiny portholes, they usually have to step over a bulkhead to enter a room, and it does a wonderful job of helping to set that up. I think any good science fiction ship tends to pull from submarine films. because it's such a tangible like point of relation. And submarines are a wonderful like real life example of a machine that is in a foreign place that has like all these set individual rooms.
That has to keep the outside out in
Yes.
order for what is inside to survive.
Yeah, because the similar things happen when you puncture the hole.
I think you bring up a good point, Ben, that you do have a pretty good spatial awareness of like where things are roughly laid out in the ship.
They use the acid to set that up wonderfully.
Yes,
Oh yeah,
I agree.
That is a really good example. But I do think that I don't know if I would ever say that I feel comfortable on the Nostromo.
No, I think it's
Sure,
designed to
yeah,
make you feel
yeah,
discomfortable.
I mean, it's because like it is so bizarre and kind of claustrophobic, and the crew members are at home there because that's their norm. And I think that sort of the uncanniness of the environment is part of what makes the film so tense even before the alien even gets on board the ship. Like, I think that from the opening credits of the movie, like, the pervading sense is dread. I don't think that ever once lets up in the film. I never feel comfortable.
There is one moment, and it is a moment that sets me up for this point nicely, and that is the dinner. And I never thought about it this way before until we watched it tonight. But one of the key things that makes that scene so nauseating is the perversion of the meal. It is such a socially holy event for like everyone to get together and have a shared meal, like the Last Supper. There's all sorts of religious iconography of like people sitting down to have like a ceremony, a meal together. You know, ceremony just in the traditional sense of just you do this every day. And the crew all value it as that. They do see it like with a degree of sacrament. Like it is.
Well, I think
Like they capitalistically, like they make a point of being like, I'm buying this dinner tonight. Like it's not good food, but like it's food, and
it's because they're relieved because everything seems to be okay for a moment, because the facehugger has fallen off of John Hurt and it has died, and he seems to be okay, and everything seems hunky dory.
So they have this one moment to like hold on to something traditional.
They were so scared and tense before this, and they think, okay, cool, we're about to get into our cryo chambers, and when we wake up, we'll be back at Earth. Everything's cool. Crisis averted. Whew. And then it gets so much worse immediately.
Immediately, like in that same scene, there is no opportunity for downtime. The crew doesn't go, like they don't even have a chance to head back to their bunks or like allow you to process that you're having a good moment before the good moment is gone.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's one of the most famous scenes in film history and one of the probably most famous on-set production stories in film history, as Ridley Scott and Dan O'Bannon did not tell the cast, except for John Hurt, what was going to happen during that scene. I think in the script, all it says is the creature emerges, I believe. And so Veronica Cartwright screams during that scene when his chest explodes and sprays blood everywhere, and all of the cast reactions were supposedly legitimate because they did not know that that was going to happen. They did not know that the creature was going to emerge from John Hurt.
It's very much in the same vein as like Friedkin shooting a gun behind a character's head right before calling action.
Yeah, on The Exorcist, or spraying the pea soup into the priest's face, like he wasn't expecting that. Yeah, like those authentic reactions. With William Friedkin, it seems a little bit more, a little bit crueler. Yeah. Like firing a gun behind somebody's head is pretty extreme.
Oh, and of course, one of the best examples too is like them dropping. In Die Hard, them dropping Alan Rickman early to get that genuine surprise reaction in his fall in Die Hard. Like there's some great moments of directors like pulling one over their over the cast. in some cases to too far
Pushing
of a
it too
degree.
far.
See our episode on The Shining. But
in this case, I think it worked fucking masterfully. Like, a huge part of what makes that scene, outside of like John Hurt's performance as he's dying, is just like everybody else's reaction. The what the fuck is happening look on everybody's face. You can't fake that.
well, and also the blood was real.
Was it like pig's blood?
Lambs, they boil it. So like Veronica Cartwright, like when she gets splashed with blood, they're throwing buckets of blood on them, and it's animal blood. They did get animal materials for the violence in this movie. Like this is old Hollywood.
When they're doing the autopsy on the dead face hugger, and you see like its bottom part that was
It's like a horseshoe crab and
yeah,
stuff.
you can tell it's real.
And lamb.
It's real meat. Like it's fleshy. Like those effects look so fucking good.
Well, it's because they went to the butcher
real.
shop and
Yeah.
played Lego. Like it's fucked up.
That's why effects like that hold up so well after 40 fucking years. This time when we were watching this movie, I just kept thinking to myself, I can't believe this movie is 40 years old.
No, name me a recent sci-fi film where the ship like looks that good on the inside. I dare you.
Underwater.
I fucking dare you. I mean, I don't know. Like we're running down like the tiled hallways and stuff and underwater. It's not the same. I know you're being sarcastic and I hate you, but like it's hard to not take the bait, Ben. God damn it.
I mean, just another example of like incredible set design in this. Probably my favorite set in the movie is the alien spaceship on the planet's surface.
Oh yeah. Did you know?
Prometheus nonsense aside, I like as much as I do like Prometheus and I love Aliens.
I love bits.
Like it's always hard for me to not think about Alien as like a standalone self-contained film because I don't know, it almost feels more sacred to me that way. So I try to not think about Alien in context of any of the other sequels or spin-offs.
I think Alien, I don't know why. I mean, we can unpack why. Like, it's easier for me to do that with. Even Alien to Aliens and Alien 3 and AVP and all of those. Even though I have such a high regard for Alien, I have so little of an issue with the other iterations.
Yeah.
Well, I
And
think
that's so often not the case with me.
yeah, what's interesting about the progression of the series as a whole is much like something like Mission Impossible. They bring on a different big director to do each one.
Yeah.
You know, and I think Mission Impossible has been more consistent with the quality
For sure.
of those sequels. But Alien, you know, you get interesting results from that.
Interesting is a good word.
Yeah, well, you know, you get very unique visions.
Each one is kind of a different genre of film as well.
And
So
they're-
I think it's easier to separate them.
Yeah, and they're all fairly self-contained. You know, they have linking bits to them. You know, Wayland Utami or Sigourney Weaver.
Right.
Or, of course,
The Alien.
the alien. Yeah. But I think they all work on their own to the point where you could probably watch any of them by themselves without much context and get
and
a
be
lot
fine.
out of it.
Yeah, I think so. Cleveland, you sound like you had more thoughts on the Space Jockeys ship.
Oh, thousands. It's one of my favorite pieces of imagery. Like it is the most iconically just unknown and strange use
It's
of
Alien.
forms. No one's done it better. Like everyone's always aping Giger. Like how do you top that? These like strange like psychosexual images. Even the
Biological
strange-
looking machinery.
Right, like even the space jockeys, like giant cannon, you know, looks phallic. It's all so odd, and to leave it at that, to not explain like what the strange space cannon thing does, to just show us this odd image of like this like weird like germination machine, like what the fuck does this do, and to just leave us with that, you know that like these aliens that were clearly trying to achieve some form of like astral hubris, right?
Yeah.
Like they're literally trying to like fuck the stars with this strange like dick machine, and they got by the alien. right? Like something burst out of its chest that's sitting on this device.
I mean, and the alien itself is like the ultimate physical personification of like sexual violence.
Right.
Like its whole life cycle is about like penetrating and violating and laying eggs, and its head looks like a big dick, and like it's all
thanks to Giger.
I mean, he was a sick,
because the script
weird
was
motherfucker.
inspired by his art in that respect.
Yeah,
like
well,
his designs came first for the
Necronom
script
4 is the painting.
Yeah, the script formed around the same time, and Scott went out to find him for that
Well,
stuff.
no, because
but, like,
he was
they
part
brought
of
in
the,
those
he was
themes
part of the
to
Dune crew.
that.
Yeah, he was
Yes.
part of the Dune crew, so he had been collaborating with Dan O'Bannon.
Mm-hmm.
So Dan O'Bannon insisted that he come along when they got.
But interestingly enough, they were actually under time and budget on the alien ship. Fun fact. I see you like shaking your head like who could give a shit, right? But I think that's part of it. Well, part of what I think makes it look so good is that fact, because they were legitimately working with what they had to do that. Now, that being said, what they had was like in the middle range, like it was pretty good.
Yeah.
But they were under what they were shooting for. A lot of what makes the alien ship so fascinating, I think, is that so much of it is obscured by fog. They used a lot of camera tricks that they weren't planning on having to use to give us like those sequences. And the mystery of it is so much cooler and more terrifying.
It's just like the Jaws comparison you made earlier, Ben. Like famously, that shark, like we even talked about in our episode, was fucking breaking down all the time. So they had to show way less of it than they intended because they didn't want to show off how fucking dog shit that the machine was. And the effect of that is it makes the shark scarier.
Yes.
And I think that so many times you see that ingenuity come from like unideal situations. Like, well, we got to make do with what we fucking have. And a lot of the time it's leave more up to the audience's imagination. And just like the little tricks they used, like in all of the wide shots of them, in the spacesuits, that was like Ridley Scott's kids, I think.
Yeah, it was.
In spacesuits to make everything look bigger. So it's like just little fucking tricks like that. Like you take a set that is smaller and then you put child actors in spacesuits and all of a sudden it looks enormous.
It's true also, especially by comparison, the Nostromo we have well enough mapped out in our headspace, right? Like you can track the whole thing because they had a lot more time and budget on the Nostromo. Whereas the crash site is much more nebulously laid out. We don't really know where on the ship John Hurt comes across the eggs or where the space jockey is in relation to the entrance. When, after they enter, how long they've been down that narrow hallway. None of those things really piece together perfectly. There's a lot of fog in between because it's a large object as they approach it, but we don't really see any direct, links on the inside. Whereas in Prometheus, we get the whole thing mapped out.
Well, I mean, that's the thing is like Prometheus felt the need to explain all of the stuff that didn't need explaining from Alien.
Yes.
And Prometheus is fun. It's got some fun parts. Like
I liked having it explained to me, whether it needed to be or not. Like I thought it was fun getting
like
it.
once again, like that's part of the reason why I look at this movie as like self-contained, because the implications of all of this stuff are so much cooler and scarier.
Yes.
The idea that like the space jockey is like a weird like biological mechanical thing, that it's like sort of fused with the ship is very biological. Did the eggs that they find, like, were they transporting them? Did they find those on this planet? Like, what was happening here? And then for Prometheus to be like, it's not actually its body, it's just a spacesuit and a helmet. It looks like a big white Play-Doh action figure man underneath, you know? It's like just deflate so much of that like really cool like spooky ambiguity.
Like I can see in writing, like on paper, how it could be scarier because they look like us, but not practically.
Nah.
It doesn't. No, I agree. The weird like elephantine like face is so cool. Like the weird almost gas mask that looks like a spine. Like it's so cool.
Yeah, and like its
spooky.
chest is broken open and it looks like ribs, but nope, turns out that's just a spacesuit too later. We're not here to talk about Prometheus.
Yeah.
But I think looking at the differences between the two is quite interesting because I think you made a really good point earlier that while the xenomorph and its different forms are shown fairly early in the movie, it's shown in parts, you know? And I think a lot of that is obviously because of limitations of the budget. But I also think it leaves quite a bit up to the imagination.
Totally.
And I think while we see the full xenomorph later on in, you know, like all the sequels and Aliens, and it's done really well in, you know, Aliens, for example, I think you get more mileage out of less in this movie just because of what they don't show.
And especially just because like you have to think about when this came out, there was nothing like this before. Like the xenomorph has been so ingrained in pop culture and horror culture for as long as we've been alive, you know, we've always been aware of it. And just to like try to get in the mind of somebody who is seeing this in theaters for the first time. My mom was one of those people. She told me about it and how like weird and scary the experience was. But like when you don't know what the xenomorph is and what it looks like how well it's hidden is terrifying, I think. Just like, what is this disgusting creature that is so horrifyingly like killing these people? For what reason, you know?
The reason is it knows nothing else. It can't be reasoned with. It can't be
perfect
bargained
organism.
with, etc. The rest of the Terminator quote that I've forgotten.
Like Yaphet Kotto says to Ash, you sound like you admire it.
I do.
I admire its purity.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, fuck, that scene is so good. Ian Holm is great, man. He's an underrated actor, I think. I wish he was in more big stuff. Yeah. But he was a good Bilbo.
Yeah. He's an even better monk.
God damn it. show Ian Holm some goddamn respect. If we were gonna talk about Tony Shalhoub, we'd be talking about Spy Kids.
Or the masterpiece Pain and Gain.
Truly a work of genius. It's so hard to break into this film for me because I can't stop just gushing over it.
I don't have any problems with it.
Yeah, there's nothing to break apart with this movie. Like, yeah, at the end, the alien looks a little action figure when it gets blasted, and that's about it. It's got a cool cat in it. What's not to love?
One thing that I want to unpack a little bit is the score.
Yeah.
Done by Howard Shore, I believe.
No, Jerry Goldsmith, I think.
Jerry Goldsmith.
Oh, Goldsmith, yeah.
It's a very surprisingly traditional score.
It is.
Very orchestral.
I've rarely ever like notice it in the movie except at like the very beginning. The piece that like when the ship is waking up and like everything's coming on, that kind of like light but mysterious tune. It's like the only part of the score that like everything else just feels, it just like enhances it so well that it just becomes a part of the whole. It doesn't ever really stand out to me.
Mm-hmm.
Goldsmith also known for Planet of the Apes, Chinatown, Gremlins. I kind of love that. I'm just imagining this film with the Gremlins score.
I can see that though.
Patton, etc. Many great masterpieces.
Well, in my opinion, like if I were to say any minor negatives, and this is just a nitpick at this point, is I feel like the score is slightly dated. I mean, obviously it's a product of its time. And on top of that, I think it doesn't become too much of an issue for me because it is so minimally used.
Yeah.
The only noticeable sequence where it like stands out for me is when the acid is coming through the floors. And you get like a weird like orchestral string section.
It is very like 70s studio movie score.
Yeah.
Sort of stuff. Yeah. I love it in the opener though.
Yeah, the beginning,
Just
I really like the music.
Classical space, man. That's such a good feel. It's impossible to picture it without hearing like heady synths. It's so nice to get strings in space. Like I love that aesthetic, peering out across the cosmos and just hearing like those orchestral movements. Like it's quite gratifying, and to make space feel like so traditional.
Ben, to your point, though, when bringing up the score, it's also good to talk about the times when there is a lack of score.
Yes.
Because I think that the uses of silence in this movie are pretty strong. Or not even just like silence, but just like ambient sound. Like I think of when at the end when she's set the ship to self-destruct and she's trying to get to the escape pod, and we have her like running through the corridors of the Nostromo, like with the cat and the flamethrower and everything steaming, and like the sirens are blaring and the lights are flashing and you don't know where the fucking alien is and it could be around every corner. That is a really great example of not using a score. My other favorite part is when she's in the escape pod at the end and is like silently putting on the spacesuit to prepare to blow the alien out, and you get all these shots of it, like probably the most like slow, like close-up shots we have of the alien, like at that point, and it's all just like set to silence and her breathing. So even though you have like all of these really gross close-ups of this nightmarish beast, you're just hearing her breath and in your, like exactly what she's hearing, like silence and her breath in her ears.
It's the same with the engine room. It's the same with them looking for the face hugger.
The clinking chains.
Because here's the thing, right? Jaws, Freddy, Jason, etc. Like any iconic like horror monster gets a theme.
Right.
What is the alien's theme? Silence. The rest of the film, even when there is no music, the sound design usually has some sort of accompaniment, the hum of the engine, the clicking computers,
ambient noise, conversation. There's
people
a lot
clinking
of, like,
and clacking,
talking over each other. It feels very natural.
Right. There's always some sort of background, except for when the alien has made its presence known. That is when there is silence. In space, no one can hear you scream.
Especially so in this movie. I think in Aliens, I feel like the motif of the aliens clicking noise almost is more of a motif.
Oh, yeah. I mean, everything about Aliens is loud by comparison.
Action movie.
Like
Yes.
as a matter of fact, the movie I think gets louder when the aliens are there. There's lots of screaming and there's all sorts of pandemonium, and they represent chaos, a loud chaos. But in this one, like whenever it has actually made its appearance, like it is silent. Even there's even a brief moment of silence before the chest burster appears. There's a moment where everyone kind of gathers around him and stops for a second. We get a moment to breathe and to sit in nothingness.
The one scene that is very loud, that I like how loud and tense it is. It's one of my favorite scenes in the movie, is when Tom Skerritt is in the air ducts looking for the alien with the flamethrower. Like everything about that scene, the way that's handled is so fucking good. The illumination of just like the pilot light on the flamethrower, the cool irising airlocks, and like them opening and closing and the sounds they make, just this like labyrinthine space where the air ducts are above and below and all around, and like not knowing where this creature that we haven't gotten a great look at what it looks like in this form yet, since it killed Harry Dean Stanton, and the beeping of the motion detector device, and like Veronica Cartwright and Sigourney Weaver like screaming over the radio, and then the sudden appearance of the alien, and then just like cut it off, just like cut to the next scene. So fucking good. Everything about the way that is paced and like the tension is handled is perfect. I am not the biggest fan of jump scares because I think they're cheap horror, but I think that one in the air ducts is maybe the best jump scare in cinema history for me.
It wasn't until I was watching the movie tonight that I was able to finally put my finger on, I think, one of the key differences of what makes a good jump scare movie and what makes a a less good jump scare movie. There are many
interested to hear your
there are many
thoughts.
qualifiers. The biggest thing that most films make the mistake of doing is not allowing for false starts. There are many moments of build up with no payoff in
Yeah.
Alien, and the lack of payoff isn't treated with a jump scare itself. And a lot of horror films, especially nowadays, love to still have a startle during those false starts. They still love to have like something make you jump and be scared. And I think we get one
They do
of those
a few
with,
of those
with the
in-
cat.
They do like 2 or
in this.
3 with Jonesy in this.
Yeah, but we're allowed as many moments of build up where everyone is okay, like the dead facehugger. Even then, like it just slip off the rafters, I suppose, and scare Sigourney. But after that, I'm trying to think. There are a couple of scenes where nothing happens. Where we're led to believe that something is going to happen and nothing does.
Even in the air duct scene, like the jump scare does not follow the standard convention of the jump scare. It doesn't happen when you expect it to, because when you expect it to happen is when he's like at the crossroads of the air ducts and there's no like they've lost track of the thing, and like the music stops and it's quiet for a second. The normal convention is to break that silence with the jump scare. But what they do instead is they have the motion tracker start beeping again, and the alien is moving towards him, and they're like yelling at him to get out of there. And it happens when he's coming down the ladder and turns to move down an air shaft, and there's the alien. They set you up for a jump scare that doesn't happen, make you feel like you might be okay, and then throw it in at a moment where you're really not expecting it.
It's a false footing,
Yeah.
really.
And I think that's an effective way to do something startling that also still has actual narrative impact, because most of the time jump scares don't do that. It's literally just like to get your adrenaline pumping because it startles you.
Well, that's the biggest thing. I don't really have a problem with jump scares in themselves. They're just cheap. Unless
Yes.
they have motivation behind them.
And I had the luxury of watching this film fairly early on. This is one of the earlier horror films I was exposed
Same.
to, and I was quite I'm quite glad for that, because I would hate to have watched this movie for the first time now, because I think that so many films have aped this style of jump scare. The false footing has been done, to death. The
I
false
don't know.
starts as well.
I mean,
like,
of course, everything's been done before, but I would actually disagree and say that like the much more modern jump scare convention is that spooky buildup and then silence for a few seconds and then jump scare. Like that's every cheap jump scare in every boring, uninspired horror movie. That is what they are. And I think that if you want to make a jump scare effective, you have to truly catch the audience off guard. It's cheap if they're expecting it, because then they know it's coming and then they still get startled regardless because it's a loud noise, and then they feel angry because it's like, I saw it coming but it still fucking got me. Like that's not satisfying. Like good jump scares are when you really don't see it coming and it's like underpinning something that has stakes.
a greater tension.
that has stakes, like the alien getting Captain Dallas in the ventilation shaft. That has stakes.
And apart from the ventilation shaft, I think the majority of the other like alien death sequences, the actual scares, like as opposed to like the little startlements, are treated more with like large reveals than they are like as jump scares, like in the engine room with the chains on the ceiling. Like
Yeah, it's the
when
alien
when makes its
revealing
appearance-
itself to somebody.
Yeah, like
and
it
then
walks
killing
up
them.
closely, yeah, and like you get to see the mouth slowly open, and I love the engineer's reaction to that, as are the men with the hat. What is he? An
Harry
engineer?
Dean Stanton.
Harry Dean
yeah.
Stanton. I love his reaction to it. He doesn't scream initially. He screams like when it actually attacks, but when he turns around and sees it, he's just so revolted that he has to comprehend it first. And I love that. Like it's so believable, and it's nice for him to not just turn around and Like, so much better just for us to get like a silent reaction on his face first. He already knows it's too late.
Yeah, and that's another thing, man. Like, this movie has a fucking insanely good cast, top to bottom.
John Hurt.
I don't
man.
think.
And to
there's
kill off John Hurt so early.
Yeah, he's the first death.
Well, and here's the thing too. Like John Hurt was like a notable star at that point. Like,
oh yeah,
and
a lot of these people were.
yeah.
Sigourney Weaver was like the most unknown.
Of course,
into this.
and that's my point. Is like the film sets you up to think that John Hurt's the hero. He's the captain of the ship. He's
John
kind
Hurt's
of like
not the captain.
Oh, is he not?
No.
Tom
Skerritt's the captain.
He's second in command?
I think
he's in a position of
lieutenant or
authority,
something,
but
yeah.
he's not okay. But he's not like the authority.
No.
He's like the head of the
Well,
expedition.
he's the first. He's the first one we see waking up.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, when they all come up out of there.
And I love that for several reasons. First, it's a cool bait and switch to make you think that John Hurt is going to be sort of the lead. But even then, John Hurt doesn't get a massive amount of screen time compared to anyone else. Everyone gets a pretty equal amount of screen time.
Well, that's
in
the
this
thing.
film.
There's no clear protagonist until after John Hurt's death.
And I'll tell you what's so great about that.
And I would say even at that point, it still kind of feels like Tom Skerritt might be the protagonist.
Because this breaks a trend that a lot of people feel is essential, particularly in horror, and that is to have a protagonist that you can really relate to, so you can be afraid for. We do relate to Sigourney, but early on, we're not really given much of Sigourney, right? We're not given much of Ripley's character.
Well, that's the thing is I think all of the characters are relatable.
Yes.
I think it feels really like an ensemble piece at the beginning. There's not a standout protagonist because they all all of their motivations and character personalities are so well and easily established that
And
believably that they're all relatable, relatively likable people as well.
And I love this because it allows the viewer to just come to terms with the world, to become a part of the environment itself. It allows the viewer to place themselves there without immediately grounding them to a character first. This film is world-oriented over character-oriented. Even though it is, like, the characterization and the character motive is extremely good, its prime object is to seat you in this place.
Well, the characters aren't complex. Like, this isn't like a character drama or a character study, you know? Like, all of the characters feel believable and they all have their own little quirks and personality traits, and you feel like you know them pretty quickly. But this isn't a movie that's like about character development, you know? It's survival.
It's all placed with intent, and it shows.
Intent and simplicity. The simpler the premise, the better, almost every time.
We haven't really talked about Ridley Scott as a person.
Do we need to?
Do we need to? I don't know.
He strikes me as kind of an asshole and, you know, more pretentious than is worthy of him, but he's made some fucking good movies.
Yeah.
And some okay movies.
Him and his brother both came from the advertising world, which is an interesting point just because of the difference in conceptual framework for things like pacing and style is prevalent in both of their films, especially Tony Scott's films, more than Ridley's. But I think there's a sensibility to really emphasizing style in Ridley Scott's films. And production value and getting mileage out of what you have.
I think Ridley Scott is a really good director. I don't know what I would say about him past that. I think a lot of the success or failure of his films comes from like the other people working on it. Like they're the ones who really set it over the top, I think.
Yeah, he tends, from what I understand, he drives a pretty he runs a pretty tight ship. Like the man works like notoriously 100-hour work weeks.
I'm sure
he's a very intense
dedicated
man
to his craft. Yeah.
I
mean, well, like I said, I think he's a very good director.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. It's just like you look at something like this and you look at something like Prometheus, and yeah, Prometheus was 30 years later, but it's like you look at the difference in quality and like what was missing between Alien and Prometheus, and it's those other great minds like Dan O'Bannon and H.R. Giger and Mobius. And so it's like same director, like same intense, passionate filmmaker.
And even with him trying to pay homage to those people.
Right.
Like it is
Prometheus,
still.
and Prometheus is like it's a fine film, but
It's even a fun film at times.
It's not it's nowhere close to Alien.
No, it has moments, but no, it's true.
It's why I can place Alien as like my favorite film of all time without Ridley Scott being in probably even my top 10 favorite directors.
I think it's also why I pretty strongly prefer like as an adaptation like 2049 to Blade Runner as opposed to like Prometheus to Alien, because Denis Villeneuve, was able to take the reins.
Ridley Scott.
And also they still had Sid Mead for it, which made a big difference. Who did the backdrops for Blade Runner and the new one, as well as Aliens, but not Alien. So Sid Mead worked on all those movies, but it doesn't seem like he worked on Alien. I couldn't find a credit for it.
Well, anyway, I mean, there's so much more to be appreciated in this movie, but I think we've hit all the biggest talking points and most interesting hallmarks. So do y'all want to rate this?
I mean, I don't even know if we have to.
I mean, it's probably pretty
probably
obvious.
A unanimous 5.
Yeah.
Golden pod for me.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of spoiled my own rating when I started out saying it's my favorite film of all time.
Yeah.
But like,
It's my favorite film of all time. I'll give it a 3.
Yeah, it's a perfect film, and it holds up remarkably well for being as old as it is.
I hope I can say the same 30 years from now.
Yeah, right. Same, honestly.
I hope I'm alive 30 years from now at this point. That's neither here nor there.
Ben, did you have an angry review that you wanted to read?
Ooh, yes, I do. I was looking on Letterboxd for some contrarian takes on Alien, and hoo boy.
We'll call this a slight spin-off of Metacritic Corner, which we haven't done in forever, but... Here we go.
So a lot of these were just short. Atrocious. Basically no CGI. If it's not computer generated, it's not real. That it has to be satire.
That's
right?
gotta be satire.
This is fake.
If it's not computer generated, it's not real.
Wow, it's a good fake though. That's hilarious.
They got me for a second.
Yeah, boy, same. Well done.
Okay. Sometimes if you hear something is a classic over and over, you feel obligated to give it a higher rating than what it deserves. It may have been a grandiose visual achievement in 1979, but with what felt like a full 10 minutes of dialogue and a full 3 minutes of the actual alien killing people, this movie is literally people slowly walking with corridors and computers going bleep bloop for an hour and 50 minutes. This was just a visual template for Blade Runner and nothing more.
I mean, I know this is an audio medium and the people listening can't see me, but I was making a slow jack-off motion that entire time because that's how I feel about that.
Complaining about those crew moments and stuff like that fucking baffles me.
Well, yeah, saying that that it's 10 minutes of dialogue, 3 minutes of Alien, and then an hour 50 minutes of walking around corridors and bleeping computers. Like, did you watch the same movie I did?
Clearly not. The answer is they don't live in the same reality that you do.
They have no appreciation for atmosphere and tension.
People are allowed to be wrong, but
they're allowed to be wrong, but I'm allowed to tell them about it too.
Yeah, damn right. Those are fun anymore?
No, most of them were just saying, oh, it's boring.
Well, this week was brought to you by Slime. Use it in your movies. It looks great. You cut back to the part where Chiefs was talking about how it looks nice with all the lights bouncing off of it.
Are we talking about like Nickelodeon slime?
Squares and rectangles.
So what do you think it would have looked like if they had put the Nickelodeon green slime on the alien instead of just a bunch of like petroleum jelly?
I mean, they
would
did
have
that,
probably
right?
looked like motherfucking Swamp Thing.
Do you think it would have been more or less scary?
Green goo alien. That sounds pretty scary to me. I don't know.
I mean, the gooier, the scarier. It's what I always say. So
You must be really scared of the Blob.
the 80s version of the Blob is pretty fucking scary.
I've seen some shots of it, and it does look pretty scary. I haven't seen it.
It's pretty good. I'm probably pick it at some point.
Yeah, if you don't, I might.
Speaking of, it is my pick next week, and now that we're past the milestone of the big hundo, I'm gonna go back.
I'm sorry, I have to say it now, but Barbarella's not a horror movie. You can't pick Barbarella.
Really?
Yeah.
All right. Well, I guess in that case, I'll go
My
back.
Little Pony Adventure isn't either.
You're really making me dig to the bottom of my bag here, Cleveland. I don't appreciate this.
Sorry, man.
But I guess if you're not going to let me do Barbarella or My Little Pony Friendship is Magic...
Thank you for getting it right.
Then I guess I'll just go back to quarantine theme and we'll talk about 28 Days Later.
Nice.
Not a much worse movie than Barbarella and My Little Pony Friendship is Magic, even though that's a television show.
Wait, we're doing that 7 days later?
Yeah. But 28 days later. But 7 days later. I don't know. I've been on a big Alex Garland kick lately, and it's quarantine virus infection themed. So, and I think 28 Days Later is a pretty good movie. So we'll talk about it next week. A ringing endorsement to come back and check back in with us. Well, shit, that'll bring our 100th episode to a close. I can't believe it's been 100 episodes already, and hopefully we'll make it to 100 more, but no promises. If you like the show and want to show some appreciation for 100 episodes of us doing this dumb shit, then go on to Apple Podcasts and leave us a 5-star rating and a nice review. We would really appreciate that, and it would make all 100 and really 125 or so of these episodes worth it. You can also follow us on Twitter at PodPeoplePod and at letterboxd.com/PodPeoplePod, where you can see a list of all the movies we talked about with our average ratings and links to those episodes. And you can check out our list of perfect Golden Pod films, which Alien has, of course, joined the ranks of. So go see what other movies we think are perfect films. You can follow me on Twitter at Deep State Aussie, where I am still quarantine posting.
I'm on Twitter at Mr. Sheets.
And I'm occasionally tweeting for Light Arc Studio as we further our next big release for It Stares Back. Go and check it out. We're on Steam in early access. And check us out for lots of delicious, fun RTS spooky times. We cannot promise you another 100 episodes, though maybe. But what I can definitely promise you is that I will be working on things until I'm dead. So go and check out some of my work on ArtStation. Just check out Cleveland Mosier and look at some cool, spooky, and also not spooky paintings. I have some fun ones, too, sometimes. I'm not all spooky.
Just mostly
sometimes.
spooky.
Yeah.
Are you still taking commissions?
Maybe. Hit me up. Let's collaborate on something. Viewer, shoot me an email. Let's make some art.
All right. Well, thank you for helping us stay on course for 100 episodes. As much as I can say that this is on course, I'm gonna go rub myself down with petroleum jelly and slither up into the air ducts where I make my home. Good night.